Clash Royale. I knew I couldn't stay away from you forever. Throughout the past few months, I have made countless videos discussing Clash Royale's declining state. All of these videos building up to a saga that has led us here, from exploring the greed behind level 15 and the broken nature of evolutions, all the way to observing the development of Clash Mini whilst calling out the game's community manager. All of that has finally led us here, to an answer, and the real reason why Clash Royale is dying. Unfortunately, this answer isn't something I can just sum up in a paragraph and call it a day, with it being rife with controversy as well as convoluted history, leading all the way back to 2016. I'm sure you'll remember this year, right? When games were simpler, musically was still a thing, and the world wasn't inundated with 1,000 apps which broadcast short form media that corrodes your brain cells. Well, one of the more notable events of that year happened to be Clash Royale being released to the world on the 2nd of March of that year. Much fanfare surrounding the game, whether you be an avid Supercell game player or not. You were bound to have been sucked up into the void that happened to be Clash Royale's popularity at the time. It was so popular to the point where Clash of Clans ended up receding in game popularity. Yeah, another thing impacting Clash of Clans and Supercell as a whole happened to be the monumental event that was Tencent acquiring a 51.5% stake within Supercell, primarily in interest of Clash of Clans, as it was bringing in millions of dollars daily back at its height. If you're somewhat unfamiliar with Tencent, they're the owners of WeChat and QQ, two massive social networking apps inside of China. They've even been condemned by the United States government for the shady practices surrounding the way they handle transactions between users as well as banking institutions. Tencent is more or less a domestic Chinese conglomerate wishing to expand into the global market, as they've been unable to break into Western markets considering their products they developed inside of China and then exported to the West are unappealing to most outside of China. Therefore, they've taken it upon themselves to invest in multiple studios surrounding the production of films and TV shows, games alongside general entertainment sectors, even going as far as investing in virtual reality. Whilst relatively unknown in the Western world, allow me to truly express how truly massive Tencent is as a corporation. Let it be known that they're the largest corporation inside of Asia right now that isn't a foreign subsidiary. They wholly own Riot Games, the creator of League of Legends, Valorant and Arcane, the League of Legends related TV show. They possess a majority stake in Miniclip, known for 8-Ball Pool. They even own a 40% stake of Epic Games, which happens to house a game as monumental as Fortnite. You might be asking why I'm introducing Tencent in such a dramatic manner, and that's because they own a whopping 84% of Supercell's private sector, meaning they have a majority say within the corporate decisions that end up affecting most of Supercell's game in the long run, especially the income aspect of the games. Their initial acquisition inside 2016 meant that Supercell ended up maintaining most of its autonomy, but as years have flown by, Tencent has gradually brought more and more of the finished game studio. Whilst this investment has arguably one of the founding pillars of All Stars, considering it was given one of the biggest chances ever, and it's now a game that has now become Supercell's most socially successful and free-to-play game, it also leads to a conflicting question regarding their influence over Supercell's Clash-related products, such as Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, and Clash Mini. Back when Tencent invested in Supercell in 2016, they were more interested in furthering their growth through an investment into everything Clash-related, and it seems as if that has remained true to this day, considering Clash of Clans and Clash Royale are both very popular in China. Clash Royale can be played via free-to-play means, and you're not exactly missing out anything major if you don't pay, but it's clear that cosmetics have been introduced in the hopes of making more money from the game. I don't really see it as an inherently bad thing, but they used to be small, exclusive and cherished items all up until Tencent finalized their stake in Supercell at just over 84%, most likely giving them the leverage necessary to push cosmetics into Clash of Clans without much resistance. Clash Royale, on the other hand, this is where most of the corporate meddling has been focused, considering Tencent have a say over almost everything Clash Royale does to make money, and that also includes gameplay changes as well as cosmetic introductions, the muddling of currencies, evolutions, the straight up scams that happen to be the so-called value packs, and the ignorance towards the community. It's not Drewbin's fault, it's not Supercell's fault. Tencent has both of them on the leash, considering in the end, they're overly reliant on Tencent for their investment. Clash Royale, quite honestly, is a murky case, considering Tencent invested within Supercell around the same time the game was starting to pick up globally and get itself on its feet, meaning if there was justification for investing into the game studio, it was most likely because Tencent saw potential within Supercell's original vision in the form of what Clash Royale was bringing to the table as a Clash of Clans spin-off. They saw that relation to the Clash of Clans universe and Clash in general, something Tencent truly admires, and decided to invest in it alongside Clash of Clans to bolster Supercell's coffers at the time. It should also be made clear that Supercell more or less runs their own games as a mini company of sorts, with everything remaining under their own umbrella. Although in theory, Tencent most likely has control over say 60% of the management decisions inside of Clash of Clans, as the game still rakes an absurd amount of money daily. But as for Clash Royale, it is extremely likely that Tencent has been in charge of over 90% of the decisions made in the past 4 years, and why wouldn't that be the case? All of these changes in the past almost half decade now have been in favour of making money. In my eyes, everything first started within the introduction of Clash Royale. Although something that was popularised partly thanks to Fortnite and other games adopting their own version of the pass rail in the form of the battle pass and other variants. It should be mentioned that the pass rail system essentially allowed the developers to charge people a set price per month for bonuses in the form of gold, gems and cosmetics, later down the line charging for magic items, wild cards and evolution shards too. Although not too problematic at the time of its introduction, this system of pumping out extremely poorly made seasons would end up setting the precedent for what would come in the game regarding its laziness, with Tencent setting the shovels in the ground in a sense. Considering their interest primarily aligned with bringing prosperity to Clash branding, and well, why wouldn't you resist the chance to introduce a system where developers can pump out slop every month whilst excusing it as fresh content? The season near the beginning of the pass rail may have been creative, but at the start of 2020, almost every single season had already descended into an unoriginal nightmare. There wasn't really much value to the pass rail at the time, so Tencent most likely pondered how they can make the system much more viable. Then suddenly a light bulb hits them. They're already a monolith using Supercell to make money in the Western market, so why not create an update that breaks the system of progression entirely so the pass rail becomes a more viable and appetizing option to people who have money? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we introduce Clan Wars 2.0. For those unfamiliar as to what Clan Wars 2.0 did, it essentially took a fully operational system regarding going to war within your Clash Royale clan and competing in that war for a weekend or less, all the way to turning into a month-long boat fest where there are barely any rewards and you've got to pay to max out your deck to have a viable chance of earning any rewards, considering the matchmaking was horrible and the entire system was extremely disproportionate towards free-to-play players compared to pay-to-win players. Imagine a tale of Sisyphus but in Clash Royale terms, constantly pushing a rock up a mountainside all before it ends up tumbling onto you. That's essentially what you were doing if you were a lower level at least. You were bashing your head up against a multitude of quests both themed around NPC conquest and real battles, only to end up being absolutely crushed by the immense level of cards you're going against. Sure, you might get a reward from it in the form of finding peace, but is that really worth it compared to the old system which had nothing wrong with it at all and it was just changed for profit reasons? This is one of those changes that clearly didn't happen thanks to Supercell wishing for it to happen. After all, Clash Royale at the time was starting to crawl into the depths of obscurity thanks to Brawl Stars being the next new Supercell game and the fact that Clash of Clans was also beginning its slowly yet inevitable resurgence at the time. Tencent needed to keep those who were starting to get into the game hooked whilst ensuring those who were impatient yet willing to spend money chose the latter option as opposed to grinding out Clan Wars for a solid month. At the time, this would be given the benefit of a doubt, even though it benefited few but ended up screwing over many. Not many people bat an eye in the long run, considering at the time, the game was receiving a lot of fresh content thanks to the previously mentioned pass rail, and this was one of those updates that was entangled with many other introductions. Little did people know that this would be the update that involved Tencent working away at the ground with those aforementioned shovels to dig Clash Royale's grave, as soon thereafter another more foreboding update would come along to bring the funeral procession. As much as I would like to fault the introduction of magic items for some of the bullshit occurring within Clash Royale, considering they've been sold in bulk lots within these so-called value packs, they've actually been instrumental in assisting the progression of the average free-to-play player for the most part, so I should spare them some of my own wrath considering their use value at the moment. However, one thing I refuse to spare happens to be the introduction of champions and later the Phoenix. At the time, this update was hailed as one of those things that would redefine Clash Royale. The excitement was high and people were hoping for them to be more accessible than ever, only for them to be locked behind the newly introduced level 14 as well as for them to be immediately unbalanced as all hell. In the positively busted department we had the Archer Queen, Monk and Golden Knight. In the negatively busted department we had the Skeleton King and Mighty Mylan, considering both were useless in comparison to their three counterparts at least at launch. I'm sure everyone here can remember their favourite YouTube creator going on a spending spree to unlock these champions first and to level them up. The short collaboration between Cashman and B-rad comes to mind regarding the introduction of the Monk as one of those events that resulted in a spending spree, but then again we've come back to the original sentiment of how Tencent has been slowly digging the cold and shallow grave for Clash Royale, milking it of any potential whilst leaving behind nothing but a drive for profit in their wake, considering spending money for an exclusive champion shouldn't be the talking point of what most content creators produce for the game. All of these updates, and that's before mentioning level 15, have been the slow stepping stones regarding Tencent's ultimate conquest to finally make Clash Royale an extremely profitable game, whilst keeping it as shallow and surface level as possible regarding their intentions. The champions built a barrier of exclusivity that the old system of buying a multitude of chests were eclipsed by. The same goes with the pass rail offering magic items and even having an admittedly worthless diamond variation. I made this point in one of my previous videos, but Tencent's goal, not Supercell's, Tencent's sole goal has been to build up a small yet wealthy sector of Clash Royale community who don't care about the free-to-play player base being ripped off, or the fact that the game has become unfathomably dry regarding updates coming out the past few years. More on that later. The fact that they have this wealthy set of individuals and are able to prey on their addiction to the dopamine associated with the thrill of finally maxing out their champions by having them burn through their wallets leads us to the evolutions we have alongside level 15. Evolutions by themselves are actually quite nice. They're not locked behind a barrier and they bring a nice variety to the usual gameplay aspects of Clash Royale you're used to seeing, as it gives some dynamic variety. Except the fact those within the top ladder and inside a Path of Legends ranking system are overly reliant on them to the point where they have killed any form of deck originality and variety within the game. The meta was already extremely unbalanced and favoured certain cards before evolutions came along, and this just amplified it to a whole new level. I guarantee you can take a look at Royale API's top decks and top players, and almost every single one of the players within the top 500 be using some form of evolved cards, as they're just that good. Do evolved cards slide into a deck quite like every other card and becomes part of it? No, you've got to base your entire deck around that evolution on most occasions just to have a fighting chance against your opponents, as evolutions have completely shifted the paradigm of Clash Royale. The fact that these evolutions are swallowing the meta whole is a bad thing, as it leaves an even tighter space for people to experiment within the top 500 without getting extremely burned out or frustrated within the limited range of cards they can play. I know this was probably changed as time goes on and more evolutions are released to the public, but these evolutions are so disproportionately balanced to the point where you're missing out. Oh yeah, one more thing. It can take months for your average free-to-play player to earn enough evolution shards for just one card, as opposed to just buying it with a value pack, which will end up with the evolution being nerfed within a month anyways. So that's just another fun example of how the game is now a shell of its former self, isn't it? These gameplay mechanics that have been introduced aren't built around making the game fun. It's built around Tencent trying to make as much money as they physically can, considering Supercell is a cash cow regarding the Western mobile market. The real reason Clash Royale is dying isn't tied to Supercell's independent decisions at all. They mostly can't help what's happening. It's Tencent's fault for all of this negative meddling, which is also inadvertently harming Supercell's reputation in the Western mobile market. It's a great job, Tencent. As for level 15, well, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's an exclusive club of individuals willing to grind out, or more realistically spend as much money as possible to max out their cards to the point where they can completely crush level 14 players. Thanks to some of the interactions that transpire, such as the log no longer one-shotting troops that previously could be eliminated at a fairer level. All level 15 has done is distort the bracket of actually good players and those who spend money on the game whilst using the same 3 decks they source from a YouTube tutorial, and they do that to such an extent where you can hardly tell which person is which. I honestly cackle at anyone who says Clash Royale is still competitively viable. It just straight up isn't. It's not about skill anymore. Okay, maybe a bit of skill is involved, but for the most part, to even get into the competitive leagues, you've got to spend a fair bit of money to ensure that you're level 15. Even so, it's not like you're fighting for something that's worth the time, considering you've got to spend an abhorrent amount of money to even be seen as a serious player within the competitive scene. All Tencent have done with their ambition to expand Supercell's profit margin and their own profit margins is reduce Clash Royale to an absolute joke regarding its competitive viability. But if you think I've only got a bone to pick with the monetary aspects of the game and nothing else, you're wrong and you owe me an apology, considering Tencent is most likely the source of some of these absolutely horrible ads you've been seeing recently. At some point, they straight up hired a Chinese company which specializes in those advertisements you usually see for some obscure game running on a marketing budget of like $200 to promote Clash Royale with this really cringe royalty-free music, as well as editing style that was straight up ripped from a template you can find for Adobe Premiere. It wouldn't surprise you if they had someone in their own offices in Shanghai make the advertising, as it was simply that terrible. Even Clash Mini has a better budget, like come on. I'd also like to elaborate on the fact that quite recently there's been an ad servicing that quite literally reminds me of those old school Mafia City ads where there's like some sort of relationship involved and Clash Royale is like the centerpiece of it. Part of me is curious as to what they're feeding their marketing department and what sort of things are happening behind the scenes for them to hire actors for this sort of thing. Like come on, Supercell, I know you're better than this. Furthermore, lack of content originality beyond evolutions being introduced to the game are most likely another source for Clash Royale's decline in recent months. Sure, they've been making more money, but they're not able to retain people considering all they've been doing for the past few months is cycling out new past Royale seasons, as well as bringing in new evolutions to give off the illusion that new content is being developed when it isn't. Sometimes I question whether or not the Clash Royale community has Alzheimer's, considering their newly introduced bats aren't new at all. They've been sitting ready for release ever since evolutions were leaked all the way 5 or so months ago. The immense levels of laziness here indicate that Tencent has just told Clash Royale's development team to go on holiday, or they've scaled it back so hard to the point where they can barely update the game with new evolutions, mechanics and seasons that are actually worth your time. This fact is further reinforced by the fact that no new cards beyond the champions and the Phoenix have been introduced in years. Let me reiterate that it has been years since we've seen a new card outside of the legendary rarity or champion rarity. No wonder why people can't find any form of thrill within developing their own decks as of recently. There just haven't been enough introductions into the game to make new decks viable anymore. Plus, evolutions basically just reuse the troops they're evolving for the most part, changing some basic modeling and gameplay mechanics associated with them and calling it a day. It's the absolute pinnacle of laziness, and beyond Tencent's meddling, the game's inability ability to evolve or introduce engaging content is contributing to its untimely demise. The game has barely seen any real changes to its mechanics since touchdown, at least that's my opinion, and even that flopped. It's a miracle that people will continue to play Clash Royale and will choose to do so when the newest things that will be added to the game within the next 2 years happen to be reskinned and slightly better variations of already existing cards, as opposed to introducing new and groundbreaking content that enhances the experience for everyone beyond cards and reskins. All of the decks within the game have remained fairly static for the past few years as well, to the point where I actually pity YouTubers who have had to base their content around building decks that can make you automatically win when the game's skill basically revolves around RNG within the matchmaking and hoping that you hard counter your opponent's deck for that aforementioned dopamine thrill. There is no mega deck that will make you win every game, there's simply luck and hoping that your opponent doesn't counter you to oblivion. When will we see something new such as story mode, actual lore for the game, new gameplay features and options to make the game more dynamic for everyone? By the looks of it, we will never see any of these things, and the same goes for seeing any new cards that involve a rarity lower than legendary being introduced to the game unless it's a cross-promotional collaboration between Supercell's network of games. Tencent is responsible for all of this. This isn't Supercell's fault, they have barely have a decision over this to begin with, and it becomes even more apparent when you factor in the new mechanic Tencent introduced to Chinese Clash Royale, which features the ability to buy virtual currency tokens, which is aimed at bypassing China's strict anti-gambling laws, considering gems can be used to gamble for chests alongside other bonuses. By making the purchase and sale of gems indirect, Tencent thwarts this law, allowing people in a country as strict as China to spend money whilst further milking the player base in the process. Furthermore, it's clear that Tencent have done nothing but exploit the branding Supercell alongside the Clash branding has to further its influence within the Western world by playing obscure financial games, trying to milk as much money from the Supercell's ventures as possible. Clash Royale being arguably the weakest link regarding the revenue department, yet being socially relevant, made it a target prime for exploitation, leading to this massive mess that has transpired in the past 4 years. Supercell has simply been framed for all of this. After all, they're the developers and independently released Clash Royale, so why not hold them accountable when they've been held at gunpoint by their corporate superiors for the past few years? Considering Clash Royale is one of those games that's ironically hard to make money off, though considering its base concept. It wouldn't surprise you if the game introduces individual character skins, kind of like Clash Mini, to make up for some of the losses the game is enduring, as Clash Royale's revenue is still eclipsed by Clash of Clans, and even undermined by a game as small as Heyday to an extent. There's simply not enough monetization options for a game that involves you playing cards against another player in the hopes that you win with a level superiority or by using skill. With a lack of monetization options within the base game comes a need to invent gameplay mechanics that feel extremely unnecessary, thus the introducing of evolutions, 2 card levels within the span of 2 years, Clan Wars 2.0 to foster that wealthy player base and test everyone's patience, champions and customization options in the form of the banner box to give everyone a sense of false individuality. All of these things have been created to force money out of the game, to make the game profitable through exploitation, considering if you boil the game down, there are card levels that are quite honestly unnecessary and progression within the form of Trophy Road. If you want proof as to why and how Clash Royale is nothing more than a cash grab nowadays, just try and imagine the game without card and king tower levels. It's just based around what cards you have locked through Trophy Road instead of through chests. It may not be as dopamine inducing as gambling, but there you have a game that's themed around skill, not around luck or monetary investments. It looks a lot healthier, more enjoyable and satisfying, doesn't it? Clash Royale's progression system is what doomed it, and the effort Tencent have made in the hopes of turning Clash Royale profitable whilst completely ignoring parts of the game that need to be tended to in the name of laziness happens to be the real reason Clash Royale is dying. If the game just stuck to adding more cards or more variation throughout the years or more arenas to enhance that sense of progression and to balance out the skill gap, the game arguably wouldn't be as stale as it is today, whereas today remains a hollow husk and where the real soul of the game remains in a shallow grave to never be revived. This has been Noir presenting the real reason Clash Royale is dying. Although a convoluted mess, I hope I've been able to illustrate the fact that Tencent are to be held accountable for the cutting corners, the leveling system within Clash Royale being convoluted as ever, and the developmental department being an absolute shambles, contributing to Clash Royale's decline, at least regarding its reputation and credibility. Thank you all for watching and may the cosmos shine upon you.